You're listening to The Voice of Russia from London. Hello, I'm Tim Ecott. Looking back over the past year, I've been amazed by the range of stories we've covered about the natural world. It's something I'm passionate about, and our airwaves have been filled with news about giant chickens, rare camels, biting spiders, endangered African elephants, and of course, the plight of the English badger, which has faced government-sanctioned culling in an attempt to control the spread of TB in cattle. The spiders made newspaper front pages in Britain when a plague of false widows seemed to be responsible for a number of people being hospitalised after suffering infected bites. One school in Worcester was even closed at Halloween when thousands of the species Steatoda nobilis were found on the premises. I got the naturalist and author Chris Packham to explain if false widows were truly dangerous.
They're quite a small, almost inconsequential spider. So if anyone's thinking of something the size of a tarantula, formidable in appearance, it's quite the opposite. They're not furry, hairy, they're quite lean, they have quite a large opisthoma. That's the rear section of the body that would equate to the abdomen in the insect. And sometimes it can be symmetrically patterned. But in, leg to leg, they measure about 1.5 centimetres long. This is the female I'm talking about, rather like your anglerfish. The males, of course, are much smaller and almost insignificant.
So what's all this fuss about? I mean, are they actually venomous?
Yes, they are venomous. Every single species of spider living on Earth is venomous. They're all carnivores. But their venom has evolved to specifically attack their target prey. There is no point in evolving a venom to attack a camel if you feed on woodlice. Nature doesn't employ such redundancy, so they're very focused. And for some abnormal reason, these very small spiders do pack a venom which can harm some humans. Now, they came into the country more than 100 years ago into the southwest, and probably due to climate change, I can't say that for sure, but we are seeing lots of impacts of climate change on highly mobile, fecund, breeding quickly animals, so particularly insects. And we're seeing dragonflies and damselflies and ladybirds sweeping up through the country as our winters become warmer and wetter and our summers the same. So it could be that climate change has led to their spread. I know that they've reached as far as Bedfordshire now, but there's not a plague of these spiders out there. They're a spider which doesn't really like to live indoors, is unlikely to come into contact with many people, so it will only be a rare opportunity when they do, and they're not aggressive. Like most of these animals, they know that they can be crushed, and they will do everything they can to avoid you.
Presumably, you're very much in the camp who thinks we shouldn't be on any sort of vendetta against spiders. They do a lot of good in nature.
Yes, they do. We've got about, nearly 500 species in the UK. They're important invertebrate predators in many sense, and we need them there. They play a valuable role in the ecology, not only for controlling certain species that we don't like, everything from mosquitoes to houseflies, but of course for all of the things that eat the spiders, all the birds in your garden that are insectivorous will take these invertebrates too. Now, one thing I will say, because I think it's worth reporting, and I'll do so rationally, is that my partner was shown some photographs recently of a gentleman who was apparently bitten by one of these false widow spiders. And the bite was quite significant. He was bitten between the finger and thumb, and it looked a little as if acid had been dripped onto his hand, and it had caused a tissue necrosis which had eaten into his hand. A couple of blisters appeared elsewhere on his body, and it took about 3 months to recover from this. Now, he didn't see the spider at the time of the bite, but a couple of days later they found what they think was a false widow spider, and that might equate because there are few other species which could inflict a bite like that. Now, the reason not to panic is that the way that you and I and everyone else responds to these types of venoms is highly individual, and the great likelihood is that the vast majority of people could be bitten by these spiders and not demonstrate such an adverse reaction. So we shouldn't use this new species, which has been here for more than 100 years, which isn't in a plague proportion, which isn't aggressive or dangerous, and infrequently comes into contact with people as a reason to purge the reputation of spiders still further.
What do you make of this media frenzy? I mean, it's being reported all over the place that these false widows are around. Is this irresponsible?
Yes, it is irresponsible. As usual, we're showing an intolerance of other life on our planet. And the one thing that we do need to recognise is that it takes all sorts to make our communities function. We can't pick and choose which animals we like and don't like. Cockroaches, rats, pigeons and spiders play an equally important role. And unless we allow them to play that role, then those communities aren't fully functional. They're not beautiful in that context, and they're certainly something that we should not encourage. We need to live alongside all of these things and show a simple tolerance for them.
That was Chris Packham talking about false widow spiders. Now, the plight of some of the world's largest creatures in Africa seems to be getting more and more serious. Elephants and rhinoceroses are being poached in record numbers to satisfy a growing trade for ivory and medicinal horn in the Far East. Some experts say that an elephant dies every 15 minutes and up to 3 rhinos are brutally killed every day. Charlie Mayhew is the chief executive of the charity Tusk, which works to save elephants and other species all over Africa. He explained to me just how serious the situation has become.
Current estimates by many experts are suggesting that as many as 35,000 elephants are being slaughtered a year for their ivory across Africa. And to put that in some context, we now estimate that the population is somewhere in the region of 450 to 500,000 animals. With that sort of rate of loss, you don't have to be a mathematician to work out how desperate the situation is.
We're talking in the space of less than a human generation when there were 1 million elephants estimated to be living in Africa.
Absolutely. Back in 1979, it was about 1.3 million. In 1989, that had crashed to somewhere between 600 and 700,000. And as I say, we're already now down below 500,000. And the poaching that we're seeing unfolding across the continent today is at an unprecedented level. It's sort of what's particularly disturbing and worrying is that this illegal trade in ivory is being exploited by both organised criminal syndicates and terrorist organisations.
And you're very clear on this. It is purely the market for ivory, which I presume you mean by the Far Eastern market. People actually want ivory. This is not people hunting animals for food.
No, this is not hunting for food. This is pure human greed, driven by insatiable appetite for ivory, primarily from the Far East. And
now, explain briefly this comment you made that organised crime is part of this trade in elephant tusks.
Well, the escalation in price that ivory is now reaching in the end-user market is such that there are significant profits to be gained by the poachers and the middlemen that are controlling this trade. And that in itself has drawn in international criminal syndicates and terrorist groups like the Lord Resistance Army or Al-Shabaab and groups like that to use to fund their own operations. And, in particular, we're seeing populations in West and Central Africa are being absolutely decimated by this trade.
And what are charities and organisations like your own, the Tusk charity, doing about this?
We, as an organisation, fund a wide portfolio of conservation projects right across Africa. We've had to invest significant sums of money into supporting security on the ground for elephant populations and other species like rhino and even lion populations as well suffering. But in addition to that, we are calling for and collaborating with other conservation groups and indeed government and to try and increase the levels of law enforcement, the penalties for trading in wildlife crime. There is a great need to increase the penalties significantly. And then there is also a huge need to engage with the consumer nations and increase the awareness amongst particularly the Far Eastern consumers as to what the reality is of this trade.
Charlie Mayhew there, Chief Executive of the Tusk charity. It hasn't all been doom and gloom when it comes to nature. An unusual project in the Gobi Desert has seen the successful breeding of some rare double-humped camels. John Hare runs the Wild Camel Protection Programme, which aims to save populations of these camels which live in both China and Mongolia.
They're critically endangered because they're under threats. At one time, they were living in Mongolia, China, and Kazakhstan about 100 years ago. And man has chased them back into the very heartland of the Gobi Desert, like Lop Nor and the Taklamakan. They are a remarkable creature. I mean, in China, for example, they withstood 43 atmospheric nuclear tests. They lived in the Lop Nor nuclear test area, and they're still breeding naturally, and they haven't got 3 humps.
Do people use these camels? I mean, have they been used as beasts of burden?
No, they as far as we can know, they were never domesticated. And the Bactrian camel, the domestic Bactrian camel, has been used for centuries as a beast of burden. But this camel, this wild camel, which through genetic testing we discovered was separated from any other known form of camel over 700,000 years ago. And so it's very special. And
they don't mix with populations of Bactrian camels?
They will crossbreed, and then you get hybrids, which is something we don't want. But there is about 800 in Mongolia, and there's about 600 in China. And the 2 countries' camels used to intermingle up until about the 1920s, when a road and railway was built from Urumqi to Beijing.
What's threatening them, though, apart from pressure perhaps on their habitat from mankind? I mean, do people hunt them? Are they liable to disease? What's wrong with them?
They used to hunt them. That has been stopped. The great danger is illegal miners. As you know, China is turning over every stone to try and find gold or other precious metals. And people are going into the deserts illegally. We found a case of them setting landmines near a water point to blow the camel up so they could get food. So there's a lot going against them.
They're very hardy.
They're very hardy. And the camel, you might not know, but any camel has the greatest immune system of any mammal. Wolves are another threat, especially in the mountainous areas. I'm talking about China now, southern China, and also in Mongolia.
What got you interested in this little-known species? Why are you passionate about this rare double-humped camel?
Interestingly, I met a Russian in Moscow in 1991 when I was taking a exhibition of environmental photographs that had come out of the Soviet Union, which had never been shown before. And I went to Moscow, and I met a interesting-looking professor, Professor Peter Gunin, and I said, "What do you do?" And he said, "I lead the joint Russian-Mongolian expeditions into the Gobi Desert." By that time, I was a little bit fed up with the job I was doing, so I said I would do anything to come with you. And so he went through my CV, and in Africa for many years I'd been working with camels. And once I said camels, he said, "Come as the wild camel expert." At that time, I had no idea there was a wild camel.
Tell me what they look like.
If you've seen pictures of a Bactrian camel, they usually have very large humps.
Are they dark fur or light?
No, they're lighter than the Bactrian camel. But one of the great differences is that in the Mongolian language, they're called Haftgai. And Haftgai means flat head. And so the shape of the skull is different to the Bactrian camel, and also the humps are much smaller and set much further apart.
What needs to be done, and what are you doing specifically to help save the species?
We've set up a large nature reserve in what was China's nuclear test area. I managed to get money for the World Bank for that. And in Mongolia, we've got a breeding center, which is the only place in the world that they're in captivity. The other thing I haven't said, that in China, but not Mongolia, they survive on salt water, and that is quite surprising.
How receptive are the Chinese authorities to your project?
Well, they did allow us to establish the reserve. There were 1 or 2 individuals who are very receptive, but the broad bureaucrat, the local councillor, he's much more interested whether there's iron ore in the reserve than whether the camels were there. So it's an uphill struggle. Mongolia's easier because the Mongolians, being nomadic people originally, are much more in tune with nature than say, the Chinese are.
So how do you interest people in supporting the project? There are so many competing causes when it comes to wildlife. How do you get people excited about camels?
I'm a great believer that education is one of the best things, especially educating young people who then tell their parents. So we do have a large educational campaign, and the more money you have, the more books you can print. The material has been written, has been published.
You're doing a book about this double
We're doing 3 separate books which can be used in schools. It's being translated into Mongolian, Chinese, Kazakh, and Uyghur.
So it's more about getting people in the areas where the camel live to think about conserving them rather than people outside giving money.
Yes, I mean, we have employees who are salaried at the breeding centre. We have to pay them every month.
How easy are the camels to breed?
Well, unlike a horse or a cow, the gestation period is 13 to 14 months. So in other words, they only have a calf every 2 years.
They're not like the pandas. They're not very keen on mating.
No,
the camels are quite keen, are they?
Well, the male and the female come into season at the same time. The male is called must. So you have both sexes, in inverted commas, on heat. So there's no shortage of willpower.
So in breeding terms, the population is stable?
The population in Mongolia has increased. When I first went, it was 450, and now it's 800. In China, it's static as far as we can. It's such a huge reserve. It's 155,000 square kilometers.
It's an obscure camel in an obscure part of the world, but what is it about them that you love?
Well, what I love about them is that they have survived against all the odds. And I think the characteristics that I've told you, survive on salt water, withstand 43 atmospheric nuclear tests, which over half were more powerful than Hiroshima. So that commands your respect. And I feel it might be something that can teach mankind, because there is a mystery about how they managed to ingest this salt water and how the young calves actually, when they're weaned, can move to drinking the salt water. It's all on our website, which is www.wildcamels.com.
John Hare there from the Wild Camel Protection Trust. Now, they may not be endangered, but they're very much loved, and for many people, they seem like the very symbol of the English countryside. They're badgers, one of the largest mammals still found in the wild in Britain. But many experts believe that they help spread bovine tuberculosis, a disease that can force farmers to slaughter cows and lose potentially millions of pounds of productivity for the farming industry. When the British government said it would go ahead with a licensed cull in Gloucestershire and Somerset, people turned out to protest at the Houses of Parliament. Among them was the veteran film star and conservationist Virginia McKenna, who starred in the film Born Free. She and Mark Jones from the Humane Society International came in to talk to me about why they believed the government was wrong.
I feel very passionate about any issue that involves the unnecessarily killing, as I use that word, rather than culling, which always makes it sound better, the killing of wildlife for mysterious reasons. I don't understand, you see, why there's this intense passion to kill in thousands this indigenous species of the United Kingdom, who has actually not done anything wrong except be itself and live in its own way, because of the infection passed supposedly from badger to cattle. No one is saying, and also actually deer also carry this TB virus. No one's saying let's kill all the deer because of that, but where will it end? Once you start this terrible kind of downhill catastrophic ride, I don't see an end in sight.
But you're not convinced of the actual science behind it either?
No, I'm not, because I'm no scientist, but there are enough scientists that I respect, including wonderful people in the veterinary profession who are totally against this. And surely vets would know far more than us and certain members of the government who perhaps aren't vets about this issue than myself. And how do you prove there's no suffering? How do you know that it can be humane and compassionate? You're not going up to a badger set and say, let me know if this isn't hurting. There is absolutely no way. And the other point I'd like to make is that actually there are lots and lots of badgers who do not have TB, yet they will also be victims of this cull. So you will get animals that are not diseased in this cull as well.
Obviously, the badger is a species that people have a lot of sentimental feelings for. If I can turn to you, Mark Jones from the Humane Society. Are you at all convinced of the science behind what the government's proposing? Because I know the statistics can be confusing for people, but they are talking about, I think it's a 16% potential reduction in bovine TB if they go ahead with the cull, and there are a lot of question marks over it. But from the scientific side, do you see any sense at all in the cull?
Well, I'm a veterinarian by profession. I've read all the reports and I've talked to a lot of scientists, a lot of politicians, a lot of other people about this. But in my view, the science really doesn't support the government's position at all. Nobody denies there's a big problem with TB in cattle and the way we go about trying to control it. We're prematurely slaughtering many tens of thousands of cattle each year at a huge cost to the taxpayer and a huge financial and emotional cost to farmers and their communities. And the government says we can't do nothing. Well, of course we can't do nothing. But killing badgers isn't going to solve this problem. The government commissioned a trial, previous government commissioned a trial back in the 90s called the Randomised Badger Culling Trial, which was designed to find out whether killing badgers in large numbers would have a significant impact on TB in cattle. That trial ran for the best part of 10 years, cost £50 million to the taxpayer, and 11,000 badgers were killed during that trial. And it's still the only significant and credible scientific study to try and figure out whether killing badgers is going to help. It was very controversial. And the conclusion of the scientists who devised and analysed the results of that trial were that culling badgers could make no meaningful contribution to the control of TB in cattle in Britain.
Virginia McKenna, if I could just turn to you for a final comment. Is there any prospect of people in power listening to this message, that there are a large number of people, including activists such as yourself, who think that killing badgers is not the way forward?
I think there's a significant amount of people in Parliament today who will agree with the way I feel as a non-expert, that it is not the way forward. And I think also there perhaps are quite an unexpectedly large number of people in the government who also feel this way. But they will have to be very courageous and come out against the policy of their party if they're going to vote against it. But I hope in the name of compassion and common sense that they will be brave enough to do that. It is a huge issue because, as I said earlier, if you don't solve this in the way we're hoping it will be solved, where will it then end? It can go on through other species and go on ad infinitum.
Virginia McKenna and Mark Jones there talking to me about badgers. My last story is about a very domestic sort of creature. It's not endangered and it's not rare. It's just very, very tall. He's called Little John and he lives at Mount Fitchett, a Norman castle in Essex. At well over 2 feet tall, he's apparently the world's biggest chicken. Jeremy Goldsmith is his owner and very proud. Hello, Jeremy. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Okay. Jeremy, just while I'm sorting out the levels, tell me what's your title there at Mount Fitchett? How do we describe you?
I'm owner-director of the of Mount Fitchett Castle family business.
Okay. And forgive me, what is Mount Fitchett Castle?
Mount Fitchett Castle is a Norman Motte and Bailey castle. It's actually unique 'cause it's the only one of its type in the world, reconstructed as it would have been in 1066, very much like the Globe Theatre in London.
Oh, okay.
So we're unique. So we get lots of visitors from all over the world, and everything's as it would have been in Norman times, including the animals, obviously. Hence.
Okay, so you keep the typical animals that would have been.
Domestic fowl, I sort of call it, farmyard animals, if you like. So we've got we've got fallow deer and sheep and goats and chickens and geese and such like.
All right, lovely. Well, let's go. And when was Mount Fitchett Castle? When does it date from?
It actually dates from dates from Roman times, and then it was a Roman signalling fort. Then it was a Saxon settlement, and then when the Normans arrived, they turned it into a Motte and Bailey castle. And obviously, we're basically from about 20 years after the conquest of 1086.
Okay. Right, lovely. Okay, well, the line is good, Jeremy, so we can go ahead.
Okay.
I know you've done this before. So, claims in the newspapers that you think you've got the world's tallest chicken. Just how big is your chicken?
He's 26 inches tall, and we basically know he's a world record beater because we hold the two previous records, so this is third time, even luckier for us. Originally we got the record in 2004 with a chicken called Melvin, and then later in 2005 with another chicken called Bertie. And funny enough, actually, Little John is a descendant of Bertie. He's kind of like his distant relative. So obviously there's something in the bloodline that makes them very tall and big.
And are you deliberately breeding these giant chickens?
No, we're not. At Mountfordshire Castle, all our animals run free. They're all free range, and they are totally free range. They can come and go as they please, and they have a very good life here. They get very spoilt by, we have like 200 children every day, school children arriving, and they get fed popcorn and sweets and sandwiches and all kinds of stuff. So they have a wonderful life, and maybe that reflects in the way they put on so much growth. But he is a giant.
Children feeding them sandwiches and popcorn doesn't sound too healthy. Are you claiming now this is some kind of Frankenstein chicken?
Possibly. Am I supersizing a chicken? Possibly. I don't know. It's a new generation we live in, isn't it? Snacking on popcorn and things. But he seems very happy eating the popcorn, so long may it last, really.
And is he just what you'd call a normal English chicken? Has he got a breed?
No, he's a Brahma. Now, most chickens, not going into it too deeply, but most chickens originate from China. That's where they originally came from. All the rare breeds that people regard as classic English breeds actually originally came from the Far East, and they were brought back into England actually from Roman times. So he is an old breed, but obviously originates from Asia originally.
Now, you say you've had the world record chicken before. Possibly you've got this unique diet down there at Mount Fitchett. But 26 inches, I mean, how much taller than a normally good-sized cockerel is that?
That is, he's massive. I mean, for a small child, a sort of child of maybe 5 or 6, I mean, he's going to come up sort of up to their chest height, so you can imagine he's a monster. A normal chicken, I would imagine, would be around about sort of 8 to 10 inches. So he's double the size. So he towers above all the others.
Are you sure it's a chicken, not a turkey?
No, we've got turkeys, funny enough, and he's taller than them. So everybody's getting taller nowadays, aren't they? Even children are growing taller. Maybe it's something we're all having in our diet. Too much protein, maybe.
And what does the future hold for little John? Is he destined for Christmas dinner, or is he going to live a happy, long life as an attraction?
No. We all our animals spend their days at the castle, so they'll live their life out free range until they die of old age. No, we never eat any of the animals. We only have the eggs, and that's about it, really. So he'll have a happy ever after story to the end of his life.
Presumably, if he's the tallest chicken in the world, and you're a business, presumably that means he's worth quite a bit. Have you got him insured for millions, like Betty Grable's legs? Or
I think that's actually a good point, to be honest with you. It's something I've probably got to consider. But as people, it's become quite trendy now to have chickens in your garden, and actually the prices of them have soared. And for an unusual kind of rare breed, you're talking £150 upwards. So, for somebody that's got a flock of rare breeds, it can add up. And actually, funny enough, insurance is something now that's coming in for rare breeds. But, of course, we have to keep watching out for the dreaded fox, because I think he's got his eye on little John, so he's our main problem.
Does he have somewhere secure to sleep at night, then?
Yes, he does. Yeah, we've got 3 chicken houses, and they get locked up every night, and we spoil them, really. I think they live better lives than we do, to be perfectly honest, get fed better anyway.
He's a cockerel. Has he got wives and girlfriends? Is he going to be a breeding cock?
He is, actually. He's got 2 girlfriends, and in the sort of chicken world, they're called a trio. That's what happens. They pair up with two girlfriends. So lucky him, really, and he seems to be enjoying all the attention and all the pampering.
Jeremy Goldsmith talking to me about Little John, his very large, record-breaking cockerel. I'm Tim Ecott, and you've been listening to a selection of some of my favourite animal stories from the past year. Goodbye.